Okay, and we have yet another living historian with a passion for history. I'd like to introduce Andy Van Sickle. Andy, a
Peter.
pleasure. And I understand you're a walking encyclopedia of trade beads.
There's other words for it, but yes,
If the shoe fits, you wear it.
yes.
So this isn't all your collection, right? You got a few more at home?
I have trunks,
Trunks full of beads.
yes.
And you've studied it for how long?
I've been bead trading for about 53 years.
53 years?
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. So we're going to get into a bit of the history, the evolution, but it's my understanding that when trade beads were first introduced to natives by Europeans, that the art of quill work pretty much ended.
That and
Is that a true statement?
yes, and the Indians were used to wearing bone and stone. So when the glass beads showed up, beautiful colors, the bone and stone quit.
They wanted it.
They wanted glass beads.
And do you know what percentage I know, like we often think in trade items that it's things like guns and traps and pots and pans and things made of steel, but 60 or 70% of the trade items were wool blankets. But what percentage would trade beads play in that?
Pretty close to the trade blankets.
Really?
It'd be guns, trade blankets, and beads.
There you go in that order.
Beads made friends.
Very good.
And it was an introductory thing. They carried armloads of small beads, and they would just hand them out like candy. And that's friend, and that got the door open. And from there, they moved on to the bigger beads.
We discussed last night where I called them Indian trade beads, and you corrected me.
They're not just Indian trade beads. They're Venetian trade beads, or glass beads, trade beads mainly, because they were traded all over the world.
Every continent.
You can go to, I know we've gone Vietnam, Philippines, all over Africa, South America. These same beads showed up in every place.
And Italy, I understand, is going to play a big role.
Venetian,
Venetian glass beads.
Of course, they moved the glass blowers over to an island because they kept burning buildings down. So they ended up on the island of Murano. So most of your trade beads are made on the island of Murano.
Okay.
They still call them Venetian trade beads.
And you mentioned you're holding one there, Andy. If I could just hold this guy
Yeah.
up. This one you called kind of a crude one. What did you call that? A Dutch donut?
That's a Dutch donut. It's cobalt blue, and they were just primarily made as spacers. That's what we use them for anyway.
Right. So this would be early era, like we're talking early 1600s.
And simple, yes.
And simple.
And simple.
Yes.
And possibly even before the 1600s. Some of them were, they were making very simple, just blobs of glass beads, 1400s, 1500s.
And then it becomes more refined, obviously,
Yes.
as time goes on. And so what other ones do we have here that
Well,
you
I've
could
got
demonstrate?
probably the most popular and the ones most traders are looking for are the Chevron beads, the red, white, and blue chevrons.
Yeah.
And this happens to be a 6-layer, which means that this was late 1700s and early 1800s. The 7-layered chevrons go all the way back to the 1400s.
Right. You know, I think about beads, that when I look at the size of these, I look at the one you're wearing, obviously antique, vintage pieces, but I think of beads that size. I don't think of them this size, but these were popular,
Right.
as popular or more popular.
To the more important, like the leader or some of the most well-known braves and stuff. People of importance got the large, what we call goose egg chevrons, goose egg beads.
Like they gifted them chief guns and such
Right.
things, right?
And sometimes they were this big.
Wow.
And you would even see chevrons like this big, and they were traded over in Egypt, and they were counterweights on camel blankets.
We definitely are getting away from Indian trade beads now.
But it was basically the same bead.
Yeah, interesting. Wow. So the collection you've got here, you said it's just a small sampling, but you're probably displaying the sort of the cross section of what was available in the 1800s.
Yeah, the real simple beads, and then on up to the fancy beads, the chevrons, which were made out of tubes, and they just cut them off and ground them down to a single bead. But yeah, the simple ones were plain, and you could see the progression as they got better. making beads. Then you came out with the French fancy beads and ghost beads and so on.
We had a necklace of ghost beads.
I have, yeah, I have.
And what's the significance behind ghost beads?
There's a ghost face right here.
Oh, for gosh sakes. I have a lot to learn. I could spend hours with you, sir. So they were very popular. What era are we talking?
These are Dutch black base. They did start in the 1700s, but really became popular here in this country in the 1800s, early 1800s. And then in plains, by the time they got out to the plains in the mid 1800s to late 1800s, they were really popular.
I like that. And back to the display case. These canes, they're called?
Right.
And that's how they start. That's the production of beads?
Well, it's actually a big glob of glass, two guys blowing on pipes on each end. That's to keep the hole. Big glob of, say, your base, which is white. Then they would add a covering of blue and red, and between each time they clamp it to give it that star design.
Okay.
And it would keep going and going and going all the time, two guys blowing. When they were ready, each guy took off running in different direction.
Really?
That pulls that out to this long cane.
Okay.
It's dropped in a wooden trough to cool and to knurl. And then when they're done, they can take their time and just cut them off and round the edges, and you've got a bead.
Specialized tools?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, they had good diamond drills and so on back then.
You know, from the research, some of the research I've done, certain indigenous nations, tribes like certain colors.
Yep.
And the one I'm most familiar with, because I'm from Canada, Upper Canada, so we have the woodlands natives around us, but the Haudenosaunee Nation, 5 nations on the South Shore, the Mohawk tribe loved white beads.
Yep.
And you were mentioning something about they would take these and they would file or rub off the blue.
And there was also a tribe up there that did not like blue, but they liked red. And so yes, with the chevrons, they could just grind off what they wanted.
Like. Yeah. That's interesting. So in terms of the trade era, what's the time frame? Like when's it? We know it starts with contact essentially. When's it end? Or has it ended?
It hasn't really ended in worldwide. It's ended here in the States mainly. Trade beads went out in the 1800s, late 1800s. By that time, they were kind of put away. They were redone for the Victorian ladies. Then they were put away, and then they blossomed again as hippie beads, love beads.
Oh yeah?
It was the same bead.
Yeah.
Been around forever.
But they're still, like you mentioned, China's still making them today. So in fact, they sometimes try to sell them off as vintage pieces.
Yes.
Like as antiques.
And they've only been at it, maybe 100 years making beads.
But they're good at making
They are
copies.
very good at copies. Yes.
So how do you know when you go to a vendor shop? First of all, is there a guild? Like, is there a bead collectors
Oh yes, there's
guild?
numerous guilds around. I was connected with the Madison, Wisconsin Bead Society.
Okay.
And there's a National Bead Museum. I was a member of that. And there's the societies and guilds, and they'll get together and trade beads like crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But also they'll take trips over to Venice, and they'll usually come back with a chest full of beads.
Yeah.
It's really funny. In the last few years, though, there's been buyers from Venice over here buying beads to take back to put in their museums because they were all gone.
They were gone. They were traded and they sold. So in terms of trade, like what would be, like I know it's pretty impossible when you're looking at the complexity of all the beads, but what would be the price? Like what do they pay for beads? We know from records, Hudson Bay, Northwest Company, we know what a 3-point blanket cost or a 2.5-point blanket cost in terms of pelts. As it might have evolved over time, but we know the price. So what about beads?
Beads were sold by the pound.
By the pound.
You can see the old records, a pound of red beads, a pound of blue beads, or whatever. And that's what you see on the written records. They were cheap.
Cheap.
They were down like penny or two a bead.
I know the natives loved colors, right?
Yes.
And it's funny, you know, if you compare it today's fashion, women like the colorful things, men tend to wear the drab things, but indigenous culture is just the opposite. They copied nature, so the male cardinal is brighter and more flamboyant than the
Right.
female cardinal. So a lot of these beads were worn by men, I suspect.
Yes.
But the
And
women did the sewing. So were they the market? Who did they target?
they targeted the men.
The men.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
The men wore the beads for a long time. It was always the men were the fancy. Well, it's like animals. The male is always the fancy one, you know, of course.
Yeah. So how did it compare? I mean, the other trade item that people wore as an ornament that was hugely popular was trade silver. So how do beads compare, you know, with trade silver as a commodity?
About the same.
About the same.
Actually, I think beads come out a little bit more. Trade silver was kind of in certain areas, where trade beads were all over the country.
Okay.
They were traded everywhere.
Yeah, you were saying too that some of these, they're coming from east to west, and that blew me away. So now we've got trade beads that are coming from California and
Right.
making their way east.
Right.
So a bit of history on that.
A little bit of the Russian beads, the Russian blues, and the coins that I use as spacers, the Chinese coins. Those were traded just right along with the beads, oftentimes coming from the west.
Okay.
And I use these as spacers in between my beads.
Yeah. And just as simple, they're not.
Right.
Oh, there's some. You can actually see Chinese symbol on it.
And they're actually older than the beads.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting.
Now, an interesting thing, when they came over on the ships, they would fill barrels full of beads in the ships to use as ballast on the way over.
Mm-hmm.
Empty it, trade them, fill it with gold and silver and whatever, use as ballast on the way back.
Hard to imagine, you know, how many beads there would be to be the ballast required for a cargo ship crossing the Atlantic in the 1750s.
They were
let's
just
say.
barrels full.
Yeah, amazing.
I visited the shipwreck of Arabia, and they have thousands of beads. And I met with the guy that, you know, one of the brothers, and we went to the back room, and he poured beads out on the table there, and we were both
You were drooling?
Yes, yes.
Thought you died and gone to heaven?
I thought so.
So you're still buying, selling, still collecting?
Selling mostly now. I'm in my 80s, and it's time to let somebody else play with them.
Are there younger people that are picking up? Like, you obviously have a lifelong passion for it, but
Oh, yeah.
is there someone to pass this on to?
Most of your bead traders right now are probably in their 30s and 40s.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it is.
Maybe we could attract a few into our hobby of living history, do you think?
They're starting to.
Yeah.
They're starting
I
to.
don't know, there's a lot of silver-haired people around this campground.
What's kind of nice about the trade beads is how I got it started in them. It was the only thing that I could put on me that was actually probably touched by a native
Yeah,
and was actually old.
yeah.
You know, your clothing has got to be new, and
Right.
it was the only thing that I really had around me that was that old.
You know, it's interesting because like artifacts from the 1700s, if you try to find original anything, certainly clothing is gone,
Right.
hats are gone, all that knowledge is gone, or ability to research stuff, but these are surviving, you know, 300, 400 years
Yep.
later, we're still feeling something that some chief carried.
Now, not real proud of those, because you can tell those have been buried.
Okay,
So,
they were unearthed.
yeah.
And so did that change the color of that particular
It does.
necklace?
It does. You can see how it eats away at the glass, and it changes a little bit.
So it would have been more of the color of the red here.
Yes. Yeah.
And what are these cones called? The longer ones? You had a name for them?
Those are Czechoslovakian beads, and they've got like a teardrop and a flower, and these are big Dutch, and the white ones were always called bird eggs. And
So we're talking about location. So Czechoslovakia, well, it isn't Czechoslovakia at the time, but beads are being made in that part of the world and being shipped over here in that period as well.
right,
Wow, that's fascinating.
the Dutch kidnapped a lot of the premier bead makers from Venice held them against their will and forced them to make beads so that they could compete. And so then the Dutch got into it, and there's a lot of Dutch beads.
So they kidnap him, take him to the Netherlands, and what did they do? You said something about a threat. They were going to burn her family homes down and kill the family.
If they didn't produce beads, they would kill their family,
So
whatever.
Forced labor in the 1600s in
Absolutely,
Europe.
yeah.
Interesting. You know, this has been fascinating, Andy. I can't thank you enough. We could sit here all afternoon. I'm sure you could tell me a lot more about beads, but I think the sun's shifting and it's starting to shine on us.
Yes,
Thanks
yes.
very much, Andy. A
Thank
pleasure.
you.
A very
You bet.
pleasure.